The blood on the midwife's cold hand told Elara Vance everything she needed to know before she even reached the woman's face, and the contraction that seized her swollen belly at that exact moment made her cry out into the empty Montana darkness. She stood in the doorway of the small cabin on the edge of Hecla, one hand gripping the wooden frame, the other cradling her stomach, as the pain rolled through her like thunder across the prairie. Mrs. Henshaw lay sprawled across her own kitchen floor, her gray hair matted with blood, her eyes staring unseeing at the ceiling. The lantern Elara had brought flickered, casting shadows that danced across the terrible scene. It was April of 1876, and Elara had walked nearly 2 miles in the darkness to reach the midwife's cabin. Her husband had been dead for 3 months, killed in a mining accident up in the hills. At 22 years old, she had been preparing to bring their child into the world alone, but at least she had counted on Mrs. Henshaw's experienced hands to guide her through it. Now even that comfort was gone. Another contraction hit, stronger than before, and Elara doubled over with a gasp. The baby was coming whether she was ready or not. She stumbled backward from the cabin, her heart hammering. The nearest doctor was in Helena, more than 20 miles away. There was no time. She would never make it back to her own cabin, either. The pains were too close together now. Elara forced herself to breathe, to think. The main street of Hecla was closer than her homestead. Perhaps someone there could help, though at this hour most would be asleep or drunk in the saloon. She turned and began walking, each step an effort, her hand pressed to her lower back. The town was quiet when she reached it, just a handful of buildings clustered along the dirt road. Light spilled from the Silver Creek saloon, and she could hear the tinny sound of a piano and rough male laughter. She had never been inside such a place, but she had no choice now. She climbed the steps slowly, pushed through the swinging doors. The music stopped. Every head turned toward her. Elara stood there, dust-covered and pale, her dress stretched tight over her belly. She must have looked like a ghost. "Please," she said, her voice breaking. "The baby is coming. Mrs. Henshaw's dead. I need help." The men stared at her with a mixture of shock and discomfort. A few shifted in their chairs. One cleared his throat. No one moved. Then a man stood up from a table in the back corner. He was tall and lean, with dark hair that touched his collar and eyes that were a startling blue even in the dim lamplight. He wore dusty trail clothes and had the weathered look of someone who spent his days under the open sky. "I will help you," he said simply. He crossed the room in a few long strides, and Elara saw that he was perhaps 25 or 26, with strong hands and a steady gaze. "My name is Owen Marshall. Can you walk?" "I don't know," Elara said honestly. Another contraction was building, and she gripped his arm as it hit. She heard herself make a sound that was almost animal, and shame flooded through her even as the pain consumed everything else. "It is all right," Owen said quietly. His arm came around her waist, supporting her. "Breathe through it. Just breathe." She focused on his voice, low and calm, and somehow made it through the contraction. When it passed, she was shaking. "I cannot go back to my cabin," she managed. "It is too far." Owen looked around the saloon. The other men were still watching, useless as fence posts. The bartender, a heavy-set man with mutton chops, said, "There's a room upstairs, number 3. It is clean." "Thank you." Owen guided Elara toward the stairs, taking each step slowly. She could feel the strength in him, the steadiness. At the top of the stairs, he found the room and helped her inside. It was small and plain, with a bed, a washstand, and a single chair. Better than nothing. "Lie down," Owen said, helping her to the bed. "I need to get some things. Water, clean cloths, anything I can find. I will be right back." "Wait." Elara caught his hand. "Do you know anything about delivering babies?" He met her eyes and she saw the honesty there. "I've helped with calving and foaling. I know it is not the same, but the principle is similar. I will do my best not to fail you." It should have terrified her, but something in his steady presence calmed her fear. She nodded and released his hand. Owen left and returned quickly with an armful of supplies. The bartender had provided clean sheets and towels, and Owen had filled a pitcher with water. He set everything down, then went to the window and opened it, letting in the cool night air. "Tell me what happened to the midwife," he said, not looking at her as he arranged the supplies. "I found her dead on her floor. There was blood. I think she fell and hit her head." Another contraction was coming. Elara braced herself. Owen came to the bedside and took her hand. "Squeeze as hard as you need to." She did, grinding her teeth against the pain. It seemed to go on forever, wave after wave. Owen did not flinch, just held her hand and watched her face. When it finally eased, she was panting. "How long have you been having contractions?" he asked. "Since early afternoon. But they were far apart then. Now they are coming faster." "And your water? Has it broken?" She felt her face flush. It was such an intimate question, but there was no room for modesty now. "Yes, about an hour ago." Owen nodded. "Then we do not have much time. I need to see how far along you are. I know this is not proper, but there is no other way." Elara closed her eyes. She had expected this would be done by Mrs. Henshaw, a woman who had delivered half the babies in the county. Instead, it would be this stranger, this cowboy she had never met before tonight. But what choice did she have? "Do what you need to do." He was as gentle as possible, his touch clinical and quick. When he was done, he washed his hands in the basin. "You're nearly there," he said. "The baby is positioned correctly. That is good." "What do I do?" Elara asked. She heard the fear in her own voice and hated it. "You do what your body tells you to do," Owen said. "When the contractions come, you push. I will be here to catch the baby and make sure everything goes as it should." The next hour was the longest of Elara's life. The contractions came one after another, relentless as a storm. Owen stayed beside her, his presence a constant anchor. He wiped her face with cool cloths, gave her water to drink, held her hand when she needed something to grip. He talked to her in that low, steady voice, telling her she was doing well, that she was strong, that it would be over soon. At some point she screamed, unable to hold it in anymore. Owen did not tell her to be quiet. He just held her tighter and said, "That is right. Let it out." Finally, when Elara thought she could not bear another moment, Owen said, "The head is crowning. With the next contraction, I need you to push as hard as you can." She did. She pushed with everything she had, every ounce of strength left in her exhausted body. She felt something shift, felt the impossible pressure. "Again," Owen said urgently, "one more." Elara bore down, and suddenly there was release, a rushing sensation. She heard a cry high and thin, and it was the most beautiful sound she had ever heard. "It is a boy," Owen said, and there was wonder in his voice. "You have a son." Elara pushed herself up on her elbows, desperate to see. Owen was holding a tiny squirming baby, cleaning his face with one of the cloths. The baby was red and wrinkled and perfect. Tears streamed down Elara's face as Owen wrapped the infant in a clean towel and placed him on her chest. "Hello," she whispered, touching the baby's downy head. "Hello, my sweet boy." The baby rooted against her, seeking, and she helped him find what he needed. The sensation was strange, but also right, deeply right. Owen busied himself with the rest of the delivery, things Elara was only vaguely aware of in her exhaustion and joy. He cleaned everything up efficiently, changing the sheets beneath her with practiced ease, making sure she was comfortable. When he was done, he stood by the window, giving her a moment of privacy with her son. "Thank you," Elara said softly. "I do not know what would have happened if you had not been there." Owen turned to look at her, and something flickered across his face. "I'm glad I could help." "Where did you learn to do that? You said you had helped with animals, but this was more than that." He was quiet for a moment. "My mother was a midwife," he said finally, "back in Kansas. I watched her work many times when I was a boy. I never thought I would need to use that knowledge." "Well, I am grateful you had it." Elara looked down at her son, who had fallen asleep in her arms. "I do not know what I am going to do now." "What do you mean?" "My husband is dead. I have a homestead, but I cannot work it alone, especially not now. I do not know how I will manage." Owen came back to the bedside. In the lamplight, she could see him clearly now. He had a good face, honest and strong. There were lines around his eyes that spoke of long days in the sun. "You will find a way," he said. "You are stronger than you think." "I do not feel very strong right now." "You just brought a child into the world under the worst circumstances imaginable. If that is not strength, I do not know what is." Elara felt tears prick her eyes again. She was so tired, and the weight of everything that had happened was starting to settle on her. "Will you stay?" she asked. "Just for tonight. I do not want to be alone." Owen pulled the chair close to the bed and sat down. "I will stay as long as you need me to." She fell asleep like that, her son in her arms, and Owen Marshall watching over them both. When Elara woke, sunlight was streaming through the window. For a moment she was disoriented, not recognizing the room. Then she felt the weight of the baby in her arms and remembered everything. She sat up carefully, her body aching in places she had not known existed. Owen was still in the chair, though he had moved it back slightly. His eyes were closed, his head tilted at an angle that would probably give him a sore neck. As if sensing her movement, he woke instantly, alert in the way of men who had spent time in dangerous places. "Good morning," he said, his voice rough with sleep. "How are you feeling?" "Sore," Elara admitted, "but alive. We both are, thanks to you." The baby stirred and began to fuss. Elara adjusted her position and helped him nurse again, getting the hang of it a bit better now. Owen looked away, respecting her modesty, and stood to stretch. "I should go see about Mrs. Henshaw," he said. "The sheriff will need to know what happened." "Of course." Elara had almost forgotten about the midwife in all the chaos. "Do you think it was just an accident?" "From what you described, it sounds that way, but it needs to be looked into properly." Owen picked up his hat from where he had set it on the washstand. "Will you be all right here for a while?" "Yes, thank you, Owen, for everything." He nodded and left, and Elara was alone with her son for the first time. She examined every inch of him, marveling at his tiny fingers and toes, the way his eyes would open occasionally to show dark blue depths. He looked like her late husband, she thought, the same nose, the same chin, but there was something of her in him too, in the shape of his mouth. "Your father would have loved you," she whispered. "He would have been so proud." The grief that she had been holding at bay since Daniel's death 3 months ago rose up fresh and sharp. He should have been here for this. They should have been together, starting their family in the little cabin they had built with their own hands. Instead, she was alone in a room above a saloon with a baby and no clear path forward. She allowed herself to cry for a few minutes, quiet tears that fell onto the blanket wrapped around her son. Then she wiped her face and straightened her shoulders. Falling apart would not help anything. She had to be practical now. Owen returned an hour later with the sheriff, a weathered man named Tom Crawford who had been a fixture in Hecla since before Elara had arrived. He questioned her gently about finding Mrs. Henshaw, and she told him everything she could remember. "It looks like she fell and struck her head on the corner of her stove," Sheriff Crawford said. "There is no sign of foul play, just a tragic accident. She was getting on in years, may have gotten dizzy and lost her balance." "She was a good woman," Elara said quietly. "She helped so many people." "That she did. I will make the arrangements for her burial." The sheriff's eyes went to the baby in her arms. "That is a fine-looking boy. I heard about what happened last night. Marshall here did a good thing." "Marshall?" Elara looked at Owen in confusion. Owen shifted uncomfortably. "It is just my last name. Marshall with 2 L's. The sheriff likes to make jokes." "Used to be a lawman down in Texas, though, did you not?" Sheriff Crawford said with a knowing look. "Before you decided you preferred cowboying." "That was a long time ago," Owen said shortly. The sheriff took the hint and changed the subject. "What are your plans now, Mrs. Vance? Do you have family who can help you?" "No, my parents are dead and my husband's family disowned him when he decided to come west. It is just me and the baby now." "What about your homestead?" "I do not know. I cannot work it alone and I cannot afford to hire help. I suppose I will have to sell it." Owen spoke up. "Where is your place?" "About 2 miles south of town, near Cottonwood Creek." "Good land?" "Good enough. We had a vegetable garden and some chickens. Daniel was working on building a barn before he died." Elara's voice caught on her late husband's name. Owen was quiet for a moment, seeming to consider something. Then he said, "I could help you work it, in exchange for room and board." Elara stared at him. "What?" "I've been drifting for a while now, taking odd jobs here and there. I could use a place to settle for a bit. You need help. It seems like a fair arrangement." "I could not ask you to do that." "You're not asking. I'm offering." Sheriff Crawford looked between them. "It is not a bad idea, Mrs. Vance. You need the help, and Owen here is a hard worker. I've seen him around town these past few weeks. He is honest, does not cause trouble." Elara did not know what to say. Part of her wanted to accept immediately. The practical part of her mind was already calculating how much easier everything would be with help. But another part, the part that worried about propriety and what people would say, hesitated. "It would not be proper," she said finally. "A widow and a single man living on the same property." "I could sleep in the barn once it is finished," Owen said, "or we could build a separate cabin. There would be nothing improper about it." "People will talk anyway." "People always talk. Does that matter more than keeping your land and providing for your son?" He was right, and Elara knew it. She looked down at the baby in her arms, at his peaceful sleeping face. She owed it to him to do whatever it took to give him a good life, even if that meant accepting help from a stranger, even if it meant enduring gossip. "All right," she said. "Thank you. I accept your offer." Something that might have been relief crossed Owen's face. "Good. When you are ready to travel, I will take you home." They stayed at the saloon for 2 more days while Elara recovered her strength. The bartender, whose name was Frank, brought them meals and refused to accept payment. "After what you did helping Mrs. Vance, it is the least I can do," he told Owen. Word spread quickly through the small town about what had happened. Several women came to visit Elara, bringing small gifts for the baby and offering advice. One of them, a young mother named Sarah who lived in town with her husband, spent an afternoon teaching Elara the finer points of caring for a newborn. "Have you chosen a name yet?" Sarah asked, rocking the baby gently. "I am calling him Thomas, after my father." "It is a good, strong name. Sarah, may I ask you something?" "Of course." "What do you think about Owen Marshall helping me with my homestead? Please be honest." Sarah was quiet for a moment, considering. "I think he seems like a decent man. My husband spoke with him a few times and said he was straightforward, did not put on airs. And what he did for you, delivering the baby, that was no small thing. Most men would have run the other way." "But people will talk." "People always talk, especially in a town this small. But if you conduct yourselves properly, and if he truly does keep his distance as he promised, then I do not see the harm in it. You need the help, Elara. There is no shame in accepting it." The words were a comfort, even if Elara still had doubts. She was entering unknown territory, and the future felt uncertain in a way it had not even when Daniel had died. At least then she had known what to do, had understood the path ahead even if it was a hard one. Now she was stepping into something new, something she could not quite define. On the 3rd day, Owen borrowed a wagon and helped Elara down the stairs and onto the seat. She held Thomas carefully, wrapped in a blanket Sarah had given her. The morning was cool and clear, with the mountains visible in the distance, their peaks still capped with snow. They rode in silence for a while, the wagon creaking along the rutted road. Elara watched the familiar landscape roll by and felt a strange mix of emotions. She was going home, but home would be different now. It would have Owen in it, this man she barely knew, and somehow that changed everything. "What made you agree to help me?" she asked suddenly. "The truth." Owen kept his eyes on the road ahead. "I told you, I need a place to stay." "There are other places, other jobs. Why this one?" He was quiet for so long that Elara thought he might not answer. Then he said, "When I was 16, my mother died. She got sick and there was nothing anyone could do. My father had already been dead for years. I was alone and I did not know how to manage. A neighbor took me in, gave me work, taught me how to be a man. He did not have to do that. He could have left me to figure it out on my own, but he helped me anyway, and it made all the difference. So you are paying it forward." Something like that. And maybe I am tired of drifting. Maybe I am ready to be part of something again. There was a loneliness in his voice that resonated with something in Elara. She understood that feeling, that sense of being adrift. She had felt it since Daniel died, like a boat without an anchor. "I am glad you were in that saloon that night," she said softly. Owen glanced at her, and for the first time she saw him smile. It transformed his face, made him look younger. "So am I." The cabin came into view a few minutes later, small and sturdy against the backdrop of rolling grassland. It was not much, just 2 rooms and a loft, but Daniel had built it with his own hands, and Elara loved it. The garden plot was overgrown now, and the chickens were clucking irritably in their pen, but everything else looked the same. Owen helped her down from the wagon and carried Thomas inside while she followed more slowly. Her body still ached from the birth, and she was careful not to push herself too hard. Inside, everything was as she had left it. The fire had long since gone out, and the cabin was chilly. Let me get a fire going, Owen said, setting the baby down gently in the cradle Daniel had made. Within minutes, he had a blaze going in the hearth, and warmth began to spread through the room. Elara sank into her rocking chair with a sigh of relief. It felt good to be home, even with all the changes. Owen went back outside and brought in the few supplies they had brought from town, then unhitched the wagon and led the horse to the small stable. When he came back in, Elara was nursing Thomas again. She had gotten used to Owen's presence enough that it did not embarrass her as much, though she still draped a shawl for modesty. He busied himself examining the cabin, checking for any repairs that might be needed. "The roof looks sound," he said, "but there are a few boards on the porch that need replacing, and the barn is about half finished, like you said. If the weather holds, I can work on that. There should be lumber out behind the cabin. Daniel had it cut but never got around to using it. I will take a look." Owen paused, then said carefully, "Where would you like me to sleep? I can bed down in the stable for now, if that is easier." Elara had been thinking about this. "The loft," she said finally. "It is not much, but it is warmer than the stable, and it is separate enough to be proper, at least until we can build something else. The loft will be fine." They fell into a routine over the next few days. Owen worked from dawn until dusk, finishing the barn, repairing fences, planting what was left of the spring season in the garden. Elara cared for Thomas and did what she could around the cabin, cooking meals and mending clothes. They spoke little, but there was an easy companionship growing between them. Elara found herself watching Owen sometimes when he did not know she was looking. The way he moved, efficient and sure. The concentration on his face when he was working on a difficult task. The gentleness in his hands when he held Thomas, which happened more and more often. He had a way with the baby, could calm him when he fussed. It was a side of him that surprised her. One evening, about 2 weeks after they had returned to the homestead, Owen came in from the barn looking troubled. Elara was making stew for supper, and Thomas was sleeping in his cradle. "What is wrong?" she asked. "There are riders," Owen said quietly. "3 of them, heading this way. I do not recognize them." Elara's heart jumped. "Do you think they mean trouble?" "I do not know, but I want you to stay inside. If something goes wrong, take the baby and go out the back. There's a dry creek bed about 100 yards north. Hide there until I come for you, or until you are sure it is safe." "Owen." "Please, Elara, just do as I ask," she nodded, fear tightening her chest. Owen went back outside, and Elara heard him greet the riders as they approached. She could not make out the words, but the tone seemed neutral, at least at first. Then voices were raised. Elara picked up Thomas, who had woken at the commotion, and moved to the window where she could see without being seen. 3 men sat on horses in front of the cabin. They were rough-looking, with the hard eyes of men who had seen trouble and caused their share of it. Owen stood between them and the cabin door, his stance relaxed but ready. "I told you this land is claimed," Owen said. "You need to move on." "That's not what we heard," one of the men said. He was older than the others, with a scar across his cheek. "We heard the man who had this claim died. That makes it open. His widow has the claim now. It is still valid. A widow and a baby? They cannot work this land." "That is not your concern." The scarred man leaned forward in his saddle. "Maybe we should talk to the widow ourselves. Let her tell us what she intends to do." "That's not going to happen. You her new man. That was quick. Poor husband barely cold in the ground." Elara saw Owen's hands curl into fists, but his voice stayed level. "What I am is someone who does not appreciate claim jumpers. Now you can leave peacefully, or we can have a problem. Your choice." For a long moment, nobody moved. Elara held her breath, her heart hammering. Thomas began to whimper, and she rocked him gently, praying he would not start crying. Finally, the scarred man sat back. "We will leave, for now. But if that woman cannot prove she can work this land, it will be up for grabs. That is the law. She can prove it. Now ride out." The men turned their horses and left, but slowly, making it clear they were not intimidated. Elara watched until they disappeared over the horizon, then hurried to the door as Owen came back inside. "Are they gone?" she asked. "For now." Owen's jaw was tight with anger. "But they will be back, or others like them will. Your husband's death has made this land look vulnerable. What do I do? They are right. I cannot work this land alone. Even with your help, it will be hard to prove to the land office that the claim is being maintained." Then we make sure it is being maintained. We finish the barn, we plant the full garden, we get more chickens, maybe some cattle if we can manage it. We show anyone who looks that this is an active working homestead. That will take money we do not have." Owen was quiet for a moment. "I have some money saved. Not much, but enough to get us started." "I cannot take your money." "It is not a gift, it is an investment. I am living here too now. It makes sense for me to contribute." Elara wanted to argue, but she could see the logic in what he was saying. And the truth was, she was out of options. "All right," she said finally. "Thank you." "You do not need to keep thanking me, Elara. We are partners in this now." Partners. The word settled between them, strange and new. Elara looked at Owen, really looked at him, and saw determination in his face. He was committed to this, to helping her, in a way she had not fully understood until now. It moved something in her chest, something she was not quite ready to examine. "I should get supper finished," she said, turning back to the stove. "I will go check the horses." Owen left, and Elara stood there for a moment, her hands shaking slightly as she stirred the stew. The encounter with the riders had shaken her more than she wanted to admit. It reminded her how precarious her situation was, how easily she could lose everything. But it had also shown her something else. Owen had stood between her and danger without hesitation. He had been willing to fight for this land, for her and Thomas. That meant something. Over the following weeks, they worked harder than ever. Owen purchased 6 chickens and a rooster from a farmer on the other side of Hecla, adding to the 4 hens they already had. He built a proper coop to protect them from predators and fixed the irrigation system for the garden. Elara planted carrots, beans, squash, and potatoes, working in the cool mornings while Thomas slept nearby in a basket. The barn was finished by early June. It was a solid structure, large enough for horses and with space for hay storage. Owen stood back and surveyed his work with satisfaction, and Elara brought him a cup of water. "It looks wonderful," she said. "Daniel would have been proud." Owen took the cup and drank deeply. "I hope so. He chose good land. It has potential. He always said that. He said we could build something here, something that would last. You still can." Elara looked out across the property, at the garden growing green, at the barn standing strong, at the mountains in the distance. "It is different than I imagined. But yes, maybe we can." She realized what she had said, the way she had included Owen in that future, and felt her face warm. But Owen did not seem to notice, or if he did, he was kind enough not to comment. He just finished his water and went back to work. That night, after Thomas had been put down to sleep and the dishes were washed, Elara and Owen sat on the porch together. It had become something of a habit, this quiet time at the end of the day. Sometimes they talked, sometimes they simply sat in companionable silence, watching the stars come out. "Tell me about your life before you came here," Elara said. "You said you were a lawman in Texas?" Owen leaned back in his chair, his face shadowed. "For a few years. I wore a badge in a town called Redemption. It was a hard place, full of hard men. Cattle rustlers, outlaws passing through, men running from the law or from their own mistakes." "Why did you leave?" "Because I got tired of the violence, tired of having to draw my gun, tired of the killing. I became a lawman because I wanted to help people, to make things better. But after a while, it felt like all I was doing was cleaning up blood and putting bodies in the ground." There was pain in his voice, old and deep. Elara reached out and touched his hand where it rested on the arm of the chair. "I'm sorry," she said softly. Owen looked down at her hand on his, and for a moment neither of them moved. Then he turned his hand over and clasped hers gently. "It was a long time ago," he said. "I'm a different person now." "Are you? Or are you still the same man, just trying to help in a different way?" He met her eyes, and in the fading light, she could see the surprise there, and something else, something warm that made her breath catch. "Maybe," he said quietly. They sat like that for a while, hands joined until the chill of the evening drove them inside. But Elara felt that touch all night, felt the warmth of his hand long after they had parted. Summer deepened, and with it, something grew between Elara and Owen that neither of them spoke about directly. It was there in the small kindnesses they showed each other, in the way Owen would bring Elara wildflowers when he came in from the fields, in the way Elara would mend his shirts without being asked. It was there in how they worked together seamlessly, anticipating each other's needs. In how Owen would play with Thomas in the evenings, making the baby laugh with silly faces and gentle bouncing. Elara found herself thinking about Owen more and more. The way his hair curled slightly when it got too long, the lines at the corners of his eyes when he smiled, the sound of his voice in the morning, rough with sleep. She tried to tell herself it was just gratitude, just the natural result of living in close quarters. But she knew it was more than that. She also felt guilt. Daniel had only been dead for 6 months. Was it wrong to have these feelings so soon? Was she betraying his memory? One afternoon, while Owen was in town getting supplies, Elara visited Daniel's grave. It was up on a small hill overlooking the property, marked with a simple wooden cross. She brought Thomas with her, carrying him in a sling across her chest. "I do not know what to do," she said to the grave, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm starting to have feelings for Owen, and it makes me feel like I am being disloyal to you. But Daniel, you are gone. You are never coming back. And I'm so lonely." The wind rustled through the grass, the only answer. Elara wiped her eyes. "I think you would have liked him. He is a good man. He works hard, and he's kind to Thomas. He makes me feel safe." She stood there for a while longer, holding her son, feeling the sun on her face. Finally, she whispered, "I hope you can forgive me," and walked back to the cabin. Owen returned as the sun was setting, the wagon loaded with supplies. Elara helped him unload, and they worked side by side, carrying sacks of flour and sugar into the cabin. When everything was put away, Owen said, "I heard something in town today." "What?" "There is going to be a dance next week, a celebration for the founding of Hecla. The whole town will be there." "I see. I thought maybe if you wanted we could go. It would be good for you to get out, to see other people. Sarah said she would watch Thomas for the evening." Elara felt her heart skip. Like a social engagement? If you want to think of it that way. Or just as two people who live together going to the same event, whatever you are comfortable with. She should say no. It was too soon, too visible. People would talk, would make assumptions, but part of her, a part she'd been trying to ignore, desperately wanted to say yes, wanted to dress up and dance and feel normal for just one evening. "All right," she said. "I will go." Owen smiled, that rare full smile that changed his whole face. "Good. I think you will enjoy it." The week passed in a blur of anticipation and nerves. Elara had one good dress, a dark blue calico that she had worn to church when she and Daniel had first arrived in Hecla. She washed and pressed it, hoping it still fit after the baby. The night of the dance, she nursed Thomas and handed him to Sarah, who had arrived early to collect him. "Do not worry about a thing," Sarah said, bouncing the baby. "We will be just fine. You go have fun." Elara changed into her dress and brushed out her long blonde hair, pinning it up in a style she had not worn since before Daniel died. When she came out of the bedroom, Owen was waiting by the door. He had cleaned up too, wearing a white shirt and vest, his hair combed back. He looked at her for a long moment. "You look beautiful," he said simply. Elara felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Thank you. You look nice too." The dance was being held in the largest building in town, a warehouse that had been cleared out and decorated with lanterns and bunting. Music spilled out into the street as they approached, fiddle and guitar and the stomp of dancing feet. Inside, it seemed like everyone in Hecla and the surrounding homesteads had turned out. People stood in clusters, talking and laughing, while others danced in the center of the room. Elara spotted Sheriff Crawford talking to Frank the bartender and several of the women who had visited her after Thomas was born. Owen stayed close to her side as they made their way through the crowd. Several people greeted them, some with warmth, others with curious looks. Elara tried not to notice the whispers, the way some of the older women's eyes followed them. "Do you want something to drink?" Owen asked. "Yes, please." He left to get them punch, and Elara stood alone for a moment. A woman she did not know very well, Mrs. Harrison, who ran the general store, approached her. "Mrs. Vance, how lovely to see you out, and looking so well, too." "Thank you, Mrs. Harrison. I hear that man you have living on your property was quite the hero the night your baby was born, delivering a child all by himself. Quite unusual." There was something sharp in her tone, a suggestion of impropriety. Elara felt her spine stiffen. Mr. Marshall saved my life and my son's life. I will be forever grateful to him. Oh, of course, of course. It is just that people do wonder, you know. A young widow and a single man living together. It raises questions. We are not living together. He works for me in exchange for room and board. It is a perfectly respectable arrangement. If you say so, dear. Mrs. Harrison drifted away, and Elara stood there feeling shaken and angry. Owen returned with 2 cups of punch. He took one look at her face and said, "What happened?" "Nothing. Just small-town gossip." His jaw tightened. "What did they say?" "It does not matter." "It matters to me." Elara looked up at him and saw genuine anger in his eyes on her behalf. It softened something in her. Mrs. Harrison was making suggestions about our living arrangement, about propriety. That busybody. Her own husband left her 2 years ago and ran off with a saloon girl from Helena. She has no room to judge anyone. Despite herself, Elara smiled. I did not know that. Everyone knows it, though they pretend not to. Listen, if you want to leave, we can. I do not want you to be uncomfortable. No, I'm not letting her ruin this evening. Besides, you promised me a dance. Owen looked surprised, then pleased. I did I? You did, when you invited me. Well then, I'm a man of my word. He took her cup and set both of them aside, then led her onto the floor. The band was playing a waltz, and Owen took her hand in his other hand settling at her waist. They began to move, and Elara was surprised to find that he was a good dancer, sure and steady. Where did you learn to dance? She asked. My mother taught me. She said a man should know how to dance, how to treat a lady properly. She sounds like she was a wonderful woman. She was. You would have liked her. They danced in silence for a few moments, and Elara became aware of how close they were, how natural it felt to be in his arms like this. She could feel the warmth of his hand through the fabric of her dress, could smell the soap he had used. It made her dizzy in a way that had nothing to do with the spinning. Elara, Owen said quietly, his breath stirring her hair. Yes? I need to tell you something. Her heart hammered. What is it? These past months working with you, being part of your life and Thomas's, it has meant more to me than I can say. I've not felt like I belonged somewhere in a long time, but I feel like I belong there, on that land, with you. Elara looked up at him, and what she saw in his eyes made her breath catch. Owen, I know it is too soon. I know you are still grieving your husband, and I do not want to rush you, but I need you to know how I feel. I am falling in love with you, Elara. Maybe I have been since the night I first saw you walk into that saloon. The music continued around them, but Elara felt like time had stopped. She opened her mouth, closed it, not knowing what to say. Her feelings were a tangle she had not fully sorted through yet. I do not expect you to say anything, Owen continued. I just wanted you to know, and I want you to know that I will wait, however long it takes. They finished the dance in silence, and when it ended, Owen led her off the floor. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. They stayed for a little while longer, talking to a few people, but the easy joy of earlier was gone, replaced by a tension that hummed between them. On the ride home, Elara was quiet, her mind whirling. Owen's confession had shaken something loose inside her, forced her to confront feelings she had been avoiding. When they pulled up to the cabin, Sarah came out with a sleeping Thomas. He was an angel, Sarah whispered, handing the baby over. Did not cry once. Thank you so much, Elara said. After Sarah left with her husband, Elara carried Thomas inside and laid him in his cradle. Owen had stayed outside, puttering around with the horses. She knew he was giving her space, and she was grateful for it. But as she stood there in the quiet cabin, looking at her sleeping son, Elara realized something. She was tired of being afraid, tired of letting guilt and propriety dictate her choices. Owen had been honest with her, had laid his heart bare. Did she not owe him the same honesty? She walked outside and found him in the barn, brushing down one of the horses. Owen, he turned, his expression guarded. Yes? I need to tell you something too. You do not have to. Yes, I do. Please, just let me say this. Elara took a breath. When Daniel died, I thought my life was over. Not literally, but in every way that mattered. I thought I would just exist, going through the motions for the sake of the baby. I did not think I would ever feel happy again, or hopeful, or excited about the future. Owen was very still, watching her. But then you came into my life, and slowly, without me even realizing it was happening, you changed everything. You made me laugh again. You made me feel safe. You gave me a reason to wake up in the morning beyond just duty. And yes, I feel guilty about that. I feel like I am betraying Daniel's memory. But I also know that he would not want me to be miserable for the rest of my life. He would want me to be happy. Elara, I am not done. I need to say this all at once or I will lose my courage. She moved closer to him. I have feelings for you too, Owen. I have been trying not to, trying to tell myself it is too soon or it is not appropriate or a dozen other excuses. But the truth is, I am falling in love with you. Maybe I have been since the night you delivered my son and stayed by my side. And I do not want to wait anymore. Life is too short and too uncertain. I want to be happy. I want to be with you. For a moment, Owen just stared at her. Then, in 2 strides, he crossed the space between them and cupped her face in his hands. Are you sure? He asked, his voice rough with emotion. Because once we start this, I'm all in. I'm not going anywhere. I'm sure, Elara whispered. He kissed her then, gentle at first, then deeper as she responded. Elara felt like she was falling and flying at the same time. His arms came around her, pulling her close, and she pressed against him, feeling the solid warmth of his body. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Owen rested his forehead against hers. I promise you, he said quietly, I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret this. I know, Elara said. I trust you. They stood there in the barn, holding each other, while the horses shuffled quietly in their stalls and the night deepened around them. Elara felt something settle in her chest, a peace she had not felt since before Daniel died. This was right. This was where she was meant to be. The next months were the happiest Elara could remember. She and Owen were careful to be discreet, not wanting to fuel gossip, but on the homestead, they allowed themselves to be a couple. They held hands while walking the property. They stole kisses when Thomas was napping. They talked for hours in the evenings, learning everything about each other. Owen was a patient man, respectful of the fact that Elara was still healing from childbirth and not pushing for more than she was ready to give. But the attraction between them was undeniable, and there were nights when it took all of Elara's willpower to send him up to the loft alone. We should get married, Owen said one evening in late August. They were sitting on the porch, watching Thomas crawl around on a blanket at their feet. He was 4 months old now and growing fast. Elara's heart jumped. Are you asking me? I am. Elara Vance, will you marry me? Will you let me be your husband and a father to Thomas and any other children we might have? Yes, Elara said, laughing and crying at the same time. Yes, of course I will marry you. Owen pulled her into his arms and kissed her thoroughly. Thomas made a babbling sound, as if in approval, and they both laughed. They were married in September in a simple ceremony at the little church in Hecla. Sarah stood up as Elara's witness, and Sheriff Crawford stood up for Owen. Elara wore a new dress she had sewn herself, pale yellow with white lace. Owen wore his best suit, looking handsome and nervous. The preacher pronounced them man and wife. And when Owen kissed her, Elara felt like her heart might burst with happiness. This was her second chance, and she was not going to waste it. The people of Hecla threw them a reception at the same warehouse where the dance had been held. Even Mrs. Harrison came, though she looked like she had swallowed something sour. Elara did not care. She had Owen and Thomas and a future stretching out before them, bright with possibility. That night, finally alone together as husband and wife, Owen carried Elara over the threshold of their cabin. I've been waiting for this, he said, his voice low and warm. So have I, Elara admitted. He set her down gently and began unpinning her hair, letting it fall around her shoulders. His hands were trembling slightly, and she found that endearing. For all his confidence, he was nervous too. We can go slow, she said softly. We have all the time in the world. I know. I just want to make this perfect for you. It already is perfect. You are perfect. They made love slowly, tenderly, learning each other in the warm darkness of their bedroom. It was different than it had been with Daniel, and Elara felt a pang of guilt about that before she pushed it away. This was not a betrayal. This was her life now, her future, and she chose to embrace it. Afterward, lying in Owen's arms, she felt complete in a way she had not felt in a long time. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you too," Owen said, pressing a kiss to her hair. "Forever, Elara. I promise you that." The years that followed were not without challenges. There were harsh winters and dry summers, crop failures and sick livestock. The three riders came back once looking to cause trouble, but Owen ran them off with the help of Sheriff Crawford and a few other homesteaders. They never returned. 10 months after they married, Elara gave birth to their first child together, a daughter they named Rose. Owen delivered her, just as he had delivered Thomas, though this time in the comfort of their own bed with much less panic. 2 years after that came twin boys, James and Samuel. The cabin grew crowded, and Owen built an addition, giving them more space. Thomas grew strong and healthy, a happy child who called Owen Papa, and did not remember a time when he was not part of their family. Owen legally adopted him when he turned 3, making it official in the eyes of the law as well as in their hearts. The homestead prospered. They expanded the garden, added a milk cow and a dozen head of cattle. Owen proved to have a gift for working the land, and Elara proved to have a head for the business side of things. Together, they made a formidable team. People in Hecla stopped gossiping, or at least, they did not do it where Elara could hear. The Marshall family became a fixture in the community. Owen served as a deputy for a few years, helping keep the peace when Sheriff Crawford needed him. Elara joined the Church Ladies Auxiliary and helped organize socials and fundraisers. On their 10th anniversary, Owen took Elara up to the hill overlooking their property. It was a warm September evening, much like the one when they had married. From where they stood, they could see the full extent of what they had built together. The cabin, expanded and improved. The barn, now surrounded by sturdy fences. The garden, lush and green. The cattle grazing in the pasture. "Do you ever regret it?" Owen asked, his arm around her waist. "Taking me in? Marrying me?" Elara looked at him in surprise. "Never. Not for a single moment. Do you?" "Not even close. You and the children are the best thing that ever happened to me. I wake up every morning grateful that I walked into that saloon the night you needed help." "I think it was fate," Elara said. "I think we were meant to find each other." "Maybe so. All I know is that I'm the luckiest man alive." They stood there as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. In the distance, they could hear the children playing, their laughter carrying on the wind. Thomas was 15 now, tall and strong, already talking about his own homestead someday. Rose was 9, a bright spark of energy who kept them all on their toes. The twins were 7, identical in appearance but completely different in temperament. "We made a good life," Elara said softly. "We did," Owen agreed, "and we are not done yet. There is still so much ahead of us." He was right, Elara knew. They had decades ahead of them, God willing. More children perhaps, or grandchildren eventually. The homestead would continue to grow and thrive. But whatever came, they would face it together. That was what mattered. She thought about that night 10 years ago, when she had walked into the saloon desperate and terrified, her baby coming and no one to help. She thought about how Owen had stood up, a stranger who owed her nothing, and offered his help. How he had delivered Thomas with steady hands and stayed by her side through the darkest night of her life. Sometimes Elara wondered what would have happened if Owen had not been there, if some other man had helped her, or if no one had helped at all. But she did not dwell on those thoughts for long. There was no point in imagining other paths when this one had led her exactly where she needed to be. "Thank you," she said, turning to face Owen, "for everything. For saving us that night, for staying, for building this life with me." Owen cupped her face gently, his thumb brushing across her cheek. "Thank you for letting me, for seeing past the drifting cowboy to the man I wanted to be. You made me better, Elara. You and the children gave me a purpose." They kissed as the last light faded from the sky, two people who had found each other in the most unlikely circumstances and built something beautiful from the ashes of loss and loneliness. As they walked back down the hill hand in hand, the stars began to appear overhead, countless and bright. The cabin glowed with lamplight, warm and welcoming. The sound of children's voices drifted on the breeze. This was home. This was family. This was love. And it had all started with a cowboy who did what needed doing and saved them both. Elara squeezed Owen's hand as they approached the cabin, and he squeezed back, a silent communication that spoke volumes. They had weathered storms together, literal and metaphorical. They had built a home from nothing, had raised children, had created a legacy that would outlast them. Inside, Thomas was reading to the younger children, his deep voice already showing hints of the man he would become. He looked up when his parents entered and smiled, that bright smile that still reminded Elara of her first husband, though Thomas had Owen's mannerisms now, his steady presence. "There you are," Thomas said. "Rose was worried you had gotten lost." "I was not worried," Rose protested, though her relief at seeing them was evident. "I just thought maybe you saw a mountain lion or something." "No mountain lions tonight," Owen said, ruffling her hair. "Just stars and the most beautiful view in Montana." The twins tumbled over, demanding to be tucked in. Owen scooped up Samuel while Elara took James, and they headed to the children's room, a comfortable space with 4 beds and quilts Elara had made by hand. The bedtime routine was familiar and comforting. Prayers were said, foreheads were kissed, and one by one the children settled into sleep. Elara stood in the doorway for a moment, watching them, her heart so full it ached. "You were thinking too hard," Owen said softly from behind her. "Just counting my blessings." "We have many to count." They retreated to their own room finally, the one addition to the cabin that was purely theirs. Owen had built them a real bed frame, solid oak that would last generations. The mattress was stuffed with fresh straw twice a year, and Elara had sewn a beautiful wedding ring quilt for their 5th anniversary. As they got ready for bed, Elara said, "Do you ever think about what life would have been like if we had not met?" Owen paused in the act of hanging up his shirt. "Sometimes. I do not like those thoughts much." "Neither do I. I was so lost after Daniel died. I did not know how I would manage." "You would have found a way. You are stronger than you think." "Maybe. But I'm glad I did not have to find out." Elara sat on the edge of the bed. "I was thinking today about Mrs. Henshaw. How her death, as tragic as it was, brought you into my life. It feels wrong to be grateful for something that came from someone else's misfortune." Owen sat beside her and took her hand. "Life is complicated that way. Good and bad tangled together until you cannot separate them. Mrs. Henshaw's death was a tragedy, but maybe some good came from it anyway. Maybe that is how we honor her memory, by living well and being grateful. That is a kind way to think about it. I learned from the best." He kissed her temple. "Now come to bed. Morning comes early and those cattle will not feed themselves." They settled in together, Elara's head on Owen's shoulder, his arm around her. Through the window, moonlight spilled across the floor. In the distance, a coyote howled and the cattle lowed in response. The sounds of the Montana night, familiar and somehow comforting. "Owen," Elara said sleepily. "Yes? I love our life. I love it too, and I love you. I love you more." He chuckled, the sound rumbling in his chest. "Impossible." They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other and in the peace of a life well lived. Outside, the stars wheeled slowly across the sky. The seasons would change, winter would come and go, and spring would return as it always did. The children would grow, the homestead would flourish, and the years would pass in the beautiful ordinary way of lives filled with love and purpose. But that night, in a cabin on the Montana plains, 2 people slept soundly, secure in the knowledge that they had found something precious and rare. They had found each other against all odds, and they had built a family, a home, a future. The cowboy who had saved a woman and her baby in their darkest hour had found his own salvation in return, and the young widow who had thought her life was over had discovered that sometimes endings are really beginnings in disguise. Their story could have ended in tragedy that April night in 1876. Instead, it became a love story for the ages, proof that in the wild and often harsh landscape of the American West, beauty and love could bloom in the most unexpected places. Years later, when Thomas was a man with his own homestead and children, he would tell them the story of how his mother had brought him into the world under the most dire circumstances, and how a stranger named Owen Marshall had saved them both, How that same man had become his father in every way that mattered, had taught him to rope and ride and treat people with respect. Rose would tell her children how her parents had built an empire from nothing, how they had loved each other with a fierceness that everyone could see, how they had been partners in every sense of the word, equal and devoted. The twins would remember their father's steady hands and their mother's quick smile, the way their parents would still hold hands at the dinner table even after decades of marriage, the way they would look at each other as if no one else in the world existed, and all of them would carry forward the lessons their parents had taught them through word and deed. That love can bloom in the darkest times, that strangers can become family, that kindness and courage matter more than wealth or status, that a life built on partnership and respect will weather any storm. The homestead would stay in the family for generations, each one adding their own improvements, their own stories. But the foundation would always be the same, built on that September night when a cowboy and a widow said their vows and promised to face the future together. As for Elara and Owen, they lived long lives side by side. They saw their children married and their grandchildren born. They celebrated victories and mourned losses. They weathered droughts and blizzards, sickness and health, joy and sorrow. Through it all, they held fast to each other. Their love did not dim with time, but rather deepened, becoming something rich and precious, a shelter in every storm. And when they were very old, sitting on the same porch where they had shared so many evenings, watching the sunset over land they had cultivated with their own hands, Owen would still take Elara's hand and tell her she was beautiful. And Elara would still look at him with stars in her eyes and tell him he was her hero. Because some love stories are written in grand gestures and dramatic declarations, but the best ones, the ones that last, are written in the small moments. In steady hands delivering a baby in a saloon room, in a decision to stay when leaving would have been easier, in choosing each other again and again through every trial and triumph. This was their story. A love born from necessity and desperation, nurtured through hard work and devotion, and ultimately transformed into something eternal. A cowboy and a widow, finding each other in the wild Montana night and choosing to build a life together that would outlast them both. It was not the life Elara had planned when she had first come west with Daniel, but it was a good life, a happy life. And in the end, that was more than most people could ask for. The story could have ended a dozen different ways, but it ended like this, with love, with family, with a homestead that would stand for generations as a testament to what two people could build when they chose each other. With children who knew they were loved, who carried forward their parents' legacy of kindness and courage. It ended, as all the best stories do, with hope. And on a clear Montana night, if you stand on the hill overlooking what was once the Marshall homestead, you can almost hear echoes of children's laughter on the wind. You can almost see a young widow walking toward a saloon, desperate and afraid. You can almost see a cowboy standing up, offering help to a stranger, not knowing that this simple act of kindness would change both their lives forever. Some might call it fate. Others might call it luck. But Elara and Owen knew the truth. It was simply love, doing what love does best, finding a way, against all odds, to bring two souls together who needed each other more than they knew. And that, in the end, was everything.